Hi. So I'm going to record for you the author's note to Abes Fish. It's kind of long, but it's really interesting and it has interesting information about Abraham Lincoln in it. So hopefully you'll enjoy reading it. I learned some new things about Abe Lincoln from reading it. Author's note. Although much has been written about the adult Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, who kept the country united and abolished slavery, we know very little about his earliest years. Most of what we do know has been passed down to us through oral history and through Abe's own telling. The story Abes Fish grew out of the following passage from his first official biography, published in 1890. It was written by John G. Nicolay and John Hay, who were Abe's private secretaries during his presidency. Once when asked what he remembered about the war with Great Britain, he replied, "Nothing but this. I had been fishing one day and caught a little fish which I was taking home. I met a soldier in the road, and having been always told at home that we must be good to the soldiers, I gave him my fish." It was a great challenge for me to spin these few lines into a book that you'd enjoy, one that I hope has made you want to learn more. As you read Abe's Fish, you probably had questions about Abe, his family, his home, and about our country at the time. I had many questions too as I began this book. First question, what was Abe's mother like? At the time of her marriage to Thomas Lincoln, Abe's mother, Nancy Hanks, was described by neighbors as a handsome young woman of 23, of appearance and intellect superior to her lowly fortunes. Unlike many working-class women of her time, Nancy could read quite well, but sources conflict about her ability to write. She made an X in the place of her signature on at least one official document. Even so, it appears that she did teach Abe and Sarah some of their letters and instructed her husband, Thomas, on how to write his name. The life of a frontier family was hard, and Nancy's days were filled with cooking, cleaning, and mending. At night, however, the family gathered by the fire and listened as she read from the only book the family owned, the Holy Bible. We can't know for certain if she read to them about the Good Samaritan, but it's likely that she did. Later, when the Lincolns moved to Indiana, Nancy died suddenly of milk fever, a disease caused by drinking milk from cows that had eaten a poisonous root. Grief-stricken 9-year-old Abe made the pegs for the coffin in which his angel mother was buried. So can you imagine that? Like helping to build your mom's coffin? What a terrible job that would be for him. Poor little guy. What happened then? About a year later, Thomas Lincoln married a Kentucky widow, Sarah Sally Bush Johnston. Fortunately for Abe, his new mother also loved books and brought along a small collection from her former home. Although Sally herself was uneducated, she recognized Abe's intelligence and encouraged him to read and write as often as he could. Just before he became president, Abe made a special trip back home to thank Sally for all that she had done for him. What sort of man was Thomas Lincoln? Abe's father was generally an easygoing man, who nonetheless became a formidable adversary when angered. Thomas Lincoln had grown up used to hard times. When he was just 6 years old, Thomas had witnessed his own father's murder and was barely saved by his older brother from being kidnapped. As a young man, Thomas wandered from farm to farm doing odd jobs until he was hired as an apprentice in the carpenter's shop owned by Nancy's uncle, Joseph Hanks. Abe's father was of average height, with dark hair and skin and a strong muscular build. Abe inherited most of these traits, but he grew much taller than his father. Much taller, in fact, than most men of that time. "I am," Abe wrote to a friend in 1860, 6 feet 4 inches nearly, lean in flesh, weighing on average 180 pounds, dark complexion with coarse black hair and gray eyes. In the wilds of Indiana, both Thomas and Abe were known for their skill with an axe, their stamina behind the plow, and their strength as wrestlers. Other than his older sister Sarah, did Abe have other siblings? When Abe was 3 years old, Nancy Lincoln gave birth to a baby boy who lived only a few days. Later, after the family had moved to Indiana and Thomas Lincoln had remarried, Abe's stepmother Sally brought along 3 children of her own. Abe's two stepsisters, Elizabeth and Matilda, and his stepbrother John, seem to have gotten along very well. Abe also spent a lot of time with his older cousin Dennis Hanks, who eventually married Abe's stepsister Elizabeth. Where is Knob Creek, and how long did Abe and his family live there? Thomas Lincoln cultivated about 30 acres of the almost 230 acres at Knob Creek Farm, located just a few miles from Hodgenville, Kentucky, where Abe and Sarah had been born. The Lincolns moved there when Abe was 2 years old and stayed until he was almost 8. Their cabin was small and simple, constructed from lumber, mud, and stones found in the immediate area. Through the lower acres ran a clear, swift stream where Abe learned to fish and where his friend Austin Gallagher once saved him from drowning. Can you imagine how history would have changed if his friend hadn't saved him from drowning? I can't even imagine. We probably would be two countries right now because of the Civil War. Like, he helped to put our country back together. Did Abe ever see slaves when he lived at Knob Creek? The Louisville-Nashville Pike, also known as the Cumberland Trail, was not far from the Lincolns' cabin. On this well-worn dirt road, Abe certainly saw all sorts of people passing by. Traveling ministers, westward-bound families in covered wagons, and soldiers heading off to battle. Slavery was legal in Kentucky when Abe lived at Knob Creek, but his parents were against it. Although Abe made his first written account of slavery while traveling down the Mississippi at age 19, he probably had seen slaves being transported along the road that ran close to his Knob Creek home. What was Abe's school like? Education was a luxury on the frontier, and families considered themselves lucky to live close to a school. Usually the schoolhouse itself was nothing more than a rough cabin with a single teacher who instructed the children in reading, writing, and ciphering. The students, who were of all ages and often had to walk many miles to get there, sat side by side on hard log benches, repeating their spelling, geography, and arithmetic lessons out loud. For this reason, they were called blab schools. Years later, when Abe ran a store and a post office, his business partner was annoyed by Abe's habit of reading the newspaper out loud. So if you're told in school to read out loud all the time, that's what'll happen to you. Oh, that's funny. Frontier schools had few books and almost no writing supplies, except perhaps for a few pieces of chalk and several small slates. Just as often, children used a piece of coal and a wooden plank to practice their spelling and arithmetic. During the cooler months, when Thomas could spare his son's help in the fields, Abe attended school as often as he could. Even so, Abe's formal education totaled less than a year. So he only went to school for a year. This is astonishing to me. The fact that he became a respected lawyer, congressman, and one of our most eloquent presidents is largely the result of his own efforts. So he was almost entirely self-taught. He taught himself all that he needed to know. If children only went to school sometimes, what did they do the rest of the time? For a family to survive on the frontier, everyone had to help. As soon as their children could walk, parents taught them how to plant, weed, and tend to the garden, take care of livestock, haul water and wood, and gather berries and nuts. Older girls helped out with food preparation and the making and mending of clothes. Older boys learned how to plow, chop wood, mend fences, and build furniture. They also learned how to fish and to hunt. Abe, perhaps because of his early losses, developed a sensitive spirit that made him opposed to any kind of cruelty. Although fishing in Knob Creek did not seem to trouble him, he did not like hunting. Only once did Abe shoot a wild animal for food. It was a wild turkey, and he felt so bad about it that he swore he would never shoot another living thing again.